Hi, and welcome. You're listening to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 1604A, and today's date is June 29th, 2018, and the title of the episode is Central Bankers Begin to Panic. Is the U.S. leaving the World Trade Organization? Let's get into the economic collapse financial news. Now, we've talked about consumer confidence before, and right now, consumer confidence, the hope part of it, has slid to 5-month lows. And the reason for this is that people are seeing inflation right now, and people are a little bit nervous, and people are being laid off, and people are still with those low-paying jobs. And we know that wages are falling. We know that the savings rate is falling, and the real economy is breaking and falling apart right in front of our eyes. I mean, that is a fact. We've been following it. We've been looking at it. We've been monitoring it, and this is what we've been seeing. Now, what's very interesting is that when they asked about the U.S. economy with trade, would more trade or less trade with other countries be better for the U.S. economy? And the people said, yes, more trade with other countries would be better. And they really didn't worry about the tariffs and things like that. And what is happening here is that, remember, most of our manufacturing has been moved out of this country. The globalists, the central bankers, have been pushing their agenda for a very long time, where they've been pushing everything out of this country. It didn't happen yesterday or last year or even during Obama. It happened a long time ago, and it was a very slow, methodical push to push everything out of the U.S. and to prepare the world for a one world government, one world type of currency situation. And we know right now that the move is to break up this globalist system, to break up the central banking system. And we can see it in many different areas, just like the agreement of NAFTA, where Trump wanted to get rid of that. But again, it's very difficult just to say, oh, let's get rid of it, because Congress would have to get involved with this. So they're renegotiating NAFTA now. It's been going on for quite a while. TPP was completely struck down. And we know that Trump would like to get rid of the World Trade Organization, which we'll get into in just a minute. But what we're seeing is all these different things make up the globalist agenda. And piece by piece, by having bilateral trade deals and doing other things, by getting rid of these other trade deals, it's being ripped apart. And the central bankers, the globalists, they're panicking right now. You hear the calls from the IMF, the Biz, they're all out there saying there might be an economic shock. Europe needs to come together, put together a rainy day fund. The Biz is out there saying, listen, there might be a couple of banks out here that might be manipulating their books, the same thing that Lehman did, and they're not as strong as they're saying they are. They're doing this because they are separating themselves from the banking system right now. Yes, they're part of the banking system, but once again, they want to make it look like they're above it and keep their organization intact, and they don't care what happens to the little banks here or there. If they go under, it makes no difference to them, as long as their system, the creation of currency, is intact and the control of countries is intact. That's all they care about. Now, in the United States, we can see from many different indicators, and we've been looking at all different indicators showing us that this whole entire system is breaking down. The numbers that are being thrown out by the government, they're completely manipulated. And what I think is happening is that Trump, with the Patriots, they're using the central bank, the globalist system, and they're pushing it to the extreme to bring down the system. This is why the corporate media and the rest are having a difficult time, saying that, oh, this is no good. Because if they started to say that, oh, these numbers are manipulated, these aren't good numbers, it would refer back to what Obama did, what Clinton did, what Bush did, and it would go back in time. So they really can't call these numbers out because they haven't really changed anything. And there's a reason why Trump and the Patriots have done this, because they're using their system and pushing it to the edge without giving them a way out. And their way out before was going to be with some type of an event. And now they're kind of stuck. And it's very difficult to call them out on this because it's their system. But the everyday person is feeling this. I mean, look, Toys R Us just closed down. They closed their last store, and 33,000 people are going to be out of work. And it's not just that one retailer. It's many, many retailers around the country. And yes, they had an online presence. If people don't have high-paying jobs, if people don't have confidence, if people can't make ends meet, they're not going to go out and spend money in brick and mortar or online. They're going to be very, very careful on what they spend on, and it's showing up in all different areas, especially retail. And it's not just, goods like TVs, electronics. We're also seeing it in other areas like the food industry. They're having a difficult time. They are slowing right now. Traffic is drying up. We also see that Americans, since inflation has ticked up, their spending is growing faster than their incomes. And we know that the savings rate right now is continually declining. It has been declining since 2013. Because what happens here as inflation, I'm talking about price inflation, when you go to the supermarket, where you go and you try to purchase goods that you need every day, fuel's going up. If these things go up, it takes more dollars to pay for something, which means people are now laying out more money than they're bringing in. And as this continues, we call this inflation, then hyperinflation, which means the value of the dollar continually declines. And it doesn't matter how much people pay you. It doesn't matter if they raise the minimum wage to $25 an hour. You will never be able to make ends meet. And this is what we're seeing right now. And wages, they've been declining. And they really haven't been going anywhere. Yes, they say they moved up a little bit. But again, they move up, they go back down, and they've been bouncing around. And we're not really seeing the wages that we saw back in the 70s. Remember when we came off the gold standard and then all of a sudden housing was repriced, incomes were repriced, interest rates were very high, and everything had to be redone because they were creating so much currency that the value of the currency was declining, and we saw inflation and they had high interest rates. Now we're on the back end. Interest rates very low. Income dropping, savings dropping. Nobody's keeping money in CDs or banks because there's no interest right now. And we see the opposite happening. And this is what happens at the back end of the system when it's dying. Because when we come off the gold standard, they were coming off a standard which was checks and balances with gold. Now, throughout this whole period of time, they've been creating currency, creating debt, creating currency, creating debt, and there are no more checks and balances. So everything's starting to break apart. Their system is designed to break apart at a certain point. It never lasts. And we're starting to see PCE inflation tick up. On a year-to-year basis, it is moving up right now, and it's rising at the fastest rate since March 2012. Now, the Fed has gone out and they have done stress tests on all different banks, and some banks didn't do that well. Now, we know the stress tests, they're a bunch of BS, and the only reason they created this test was because back in 2008, people were losing confidence in banks because they needed bailouts, and they needed to restore confidence. So they said, you know something, we'll create something called a stress test to let you know how the banks are doing. And we know this is fake, phony, and false. But they pointed to the really bad banks where they're in big trouble, like Deutsche Bank and many other banks. Well, they didn't do too well. And we can see that a lot of these banks, they're buying back their stocks, paying out dividends. And when we look at this, the biz has been telling us that some of these banks have been manipulating their books. What they're showing and what's really happening is not the same. And this is what happened to Lehman. Now, we didn't know any of this until Lehman imploded. And then we saw, other banking or other insurance companies or manufacturers, then they all started coming out of the woodwork saying they had too much debt, they couldn't make payment, they couldn't do anything. And then we saw AIG ask for a bailout, the automobile industry asked for a bailout, we saw Bear Stearns and many, many other banks, Bank of America, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan Chase, they all asked for something. And we see once again that we don't know what's really happening just that the biz is telling us this, it means that it's much bigger than what they're saying. Now, what's very interesting, we talk about Mnuchin and how he's always out there. And in the beginning, he said that Trump was going to look at the TPP. He might even sign the TPP, and the U.S. might join, with the other countries. Well, Trump came out and said, no, we're not doing that. So that turned out to be fake, phony, and false. Then Mnuchin came out and he started to talk about all different other things where he's tweeting for Donald Trump. And once again, that turned out to be fake. Now Trump is out there and is reported by Axios saying that the Trump administration is looking to leave the World Trade Organization. Now, we know that Trump doesn't like the WTO. He's making a lot of bilateral trades. Mnuchin, on the other hand, is out there saying that this is a fake story. Now, this is very interesting because Mnuchin and Trump, they're not on the same page. Actually, Mnuchin, I think, is trying to convince Trump for the central bank and the bankers to move him in a certain direction. And I think Trump fights back. And I think Mnuchin right now is trying to stop what is really happening here. And I think what's really happening is eventually, just like the TPP, NAFTA, I think Trump is going to want to leave the WTO. I don't think he thinks it's a benefit. I think he thinks there's no reason for this. And I think that there's no reason to have a centralized trading organization. And of course, this is set up by the central bank, the globalists, to control all the countries, bring them down to a certain level so they're all even. And we see right now it's better to be diversified in having bilateral trades with each country, making a deal with each country. So if this deal falls apart with, let's say, France, it doesn't affect anyone else. And I think right now, Mnuchin is either being set up and Trump is watching him, and maybe he's going to get rid of him because he did this with McMaster's. He did this with many, many other people. So we see right now that the central bankers, the globalists, they are very worried because their system is being dismantled right in front of their eyes. Because what is happening? All of this is being done to prepare for this major transition. And this transition is going to happen one way or another, because the only way out of this is to destroy the globalist central banking system. And once that is done, then you're free to move this system in any direction you want. And of course, the central bankers, they're not going to want this to happen. They're going to want their system to be moved to their new system. So this is where we go back to the idea of who's going to control the narrative. Just like in the 70s, who controlled the narrative back then? It was the globalists, the central bank, where they said there's gold speculators and we need to take the dollar off gold, the gold standard. And they made this whole story up to make us believe that this is why this is happening. This is why we're seeing shortages in fuel. And this is why we have inflation. This is why we see high interest rates. And they made up this whole entire story. The backstory was they didn't tell us that we were moving off the gold standard onto their new system, the petrodollar system, where they can create currency without any checks and balances. So once again, whoever controls the narrative is going to control the next move. And we can see Trump and the Patriots and the central bank and the globalists, they are fighting it out right now. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.